Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Could there really and truly be vampires? Where could such an outlandish idea even come from? Can music influence paranormal events?
Hello, and welcome to the 918th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app, from TalkStream Live, on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, that was Paul, and today we are bringing you a combination show with some pretty weird subjects, so feel free to call in today, especially if you have questions about vampires and weird music. The number is 401-766-1240. That's from anywhere, or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com.
Well, trick or treat, everybody. This is the first time since 2011 our show has fallen on actual Halloween Day. So our scheduled guest was Alexander Petikoff, who, through no control of his own, had a conference he was speaking at extended to an extra day, so he could not be with us, although he will try to call in a little bit later. So during everybody asks us, what have we done lately? Well, obviously we kind of had our wings clipped during a pandemic, as everybody did. And I myself was doing a lot of research on the vampire traditions and beliefs. Because as you know, many times we've said on the show, anything from folklore is there because something happened in the human experience that imprinted itself upon the human psyche somehow. And beliefs grew up around that, and baggage was taken on, things of this kind. So the vampire, people who supposedly live by feeding upon the blood of other people or other creatures anyway. There are traditions about this sort of thing all over the world, in the Orient, the Middle East, Greece, Rome, and folklore, as we've often said, is the vessel of the memory of the human race. It's based on something profound, as I say, that happened in the human experience, imprinted, and we put labels on it that we can understand, whereas the actual reality might be far deeper or weirder or different, at least, from the labels. Now, one of the quotes, and I believe Abraham Stoker, the author of Dracula, who's going to come up several times in this monologue because he had a local connection, really, in Rhode Island here. Deuteronomy 12, the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy, says, "The blood is the life." The blood is the life. There seems to be a real notion of that throughout human culture, that the blood is the life. And obviously, if you bleed to death, you're not going to be alive. But what is the context of that quote? It's essentially that the actual quote in its entirety is, "Be sure you do not eat the blood, because the blood is the life, and you must not eat the life with the meat." These are dietary guidelines that were set in the Old Testament. There are a lot of very specific dietary guidelines set in Leviticus, but especially Deuteronomy. Now, the Old Testament, again, contains not just Israelite beliefs, the ancient Hebrews, but beliefs that were shared with their Sumerian and Babylonian predecessors and a lot of the people in the area at the time, like the Canaanites. This seemed to be good advice on health. For example, the proscription against eating pork prevented trichinosis, and among other things. It was very difficult to maintain a purity of meat in those days, particularly with pigs. So there seem to be good practical reasons for some of this, but this idea of the blood is the life seems to range behind a lot of the vampire legends that later came about. But they weren't new in the 18th or 19th centuries. There was a notion, the Sumerians had a notion, and my ancient Sumerian is a little rusty, but it's akakaru, is ghost. Or break it down etymologically from what I remember, and it's more like life-sucking ghost. That sounds like the parasites we often talk about, the quote-unquote demons. But it also would set the stage for a belief in something like a physical vampire. There was, it's interesting that the devil is always portrayed in popular art with horns. But the god Nergal, from the Middle East, Sumerian god, sometimes was described as a warrior, other times described as a dragon, but always described as having horns. But again, that was very, very common, if not universal, among Middle Eastern gods. Now, being an underworld god, Nergal had some bird-like characteristics. Now, that's very interesting from the point of view of my 1974 Bridgeport poltergeist case with Ed and Lorraine Warren, when I had a physical confrontation with something that felt bird-like. I could actually feel the physical characteristics of this thing, which wasn't supposed to have physical characteristics, because to us it was a demon, which by definition is a spirit with no body. Well, that was not the case here, and we've talked about that on many other shows, and in our 2016 book, Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong, there's the full account of that case. And the Middle Eastern god, particularly Nergal, would have claws, again, sometimes described as a dragon who drinks the blood of the living. Elsewhere in the text, he is said to be offered secret blood rituals. Now, somehow, apparently that came down and was translated into East European tradition of vampire ghosts inhabiting bodies and preying on the family members for blood. Now, we all know the vampire legend from, Dracula or so we're not saying that the son of Dracula is running around looking for the daughter of Frankenstein right now out there somewhere.
I'd like to point out
sure
that it's I think we as good old modern materialists like to look at ancient history such as these and think we almost view it as none of these cultures had contact with anybody else. And that all of their stuff is just separate from everybody else, and they didn't mix, they didn't talk to anybody. They're just like, okay, well, the Mesopotamians believed this, the Hebrews believed this, done. But yet, there's all sorts of historical accounts of all these cultures interacting and taking each other's ideas and being like, well, this is what we think this is, and interpreting, i.e., Baal worshippers and whatnot, where they pop up in Scripture, but also the Ugaritic tablets that were discovered within the last couple, decades, and all this other stuff. And it's, it shows interactions between all these cultures, and it's something really important to point out that everybody interacted with everybody else. So all these ideas were shared and changed over time.
Right. So fast forward, as we say, to 1892, or actually maybe about the time of the American Revolution. And one looks back in the history of New England here, and particularly Rhode Island and Connecticut, in our listening area, and we have some very bizarre experiences having to do with vampire beliefs. Now, everybody knows about the witchcraft hysteria of the 1640s in Connecticut. Well, maybe they don't know about that one, but they know about the one in Cape Ann, Massachusetts, Salem and Danvers in the 1690s, and everybody thinks of that. But there was a vampire hysteria. People believed people actually had been vampires, and very much in that ancient tradition of people having their bodies, after they died, inhabited by ghosts, would raise them from the grave to feed upon the blood of their relatives. Now, they wouldn't just lie in wait by the side of the road and attack slow drivers. I mean, they would, according to the beliefs, they would come in and would be preying upon their own relatives. So as people started to pass away in a family one by one, there would be a belief during this hysteria in New England that they were preying upon their own relatives, and it was a definite problem. The Mercy Brown case in Rhode Island is probably the most prominent, and it's very interesting that when Bram Stoker translated or died in 1912, among his papers were found newspaper clippings about the Exeter, Rhode Island case. So right now we'll pause for a caller.
Yes, and that is Tom Spitaleri on the line with us.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Paul. How we doing? Happy Samhain, happy Halloween.
And to you, my friend.
Yes, and I just wanted to call. I know you've got a great going on about Mercy Brown. I know very little about her except what the legendary...
Well, keep listening to the show. You'll learn more.
Yeah, I will be listening to the show to learn more about Mercy Brown. But, I read about Mercy Brown through some of the stuff that Tom wrote. I'm never legend.
Tom D'Agostino,
like
yeah,
you.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've been interested in the Ossipee Triangle in New Hampshire, is that
I
correct?
have been, and guess what? I forgot to tell you. You got family connected to the Ossipee Triangle.
Well, that's about right.
How did you not know that?
I try to know everything, but somebody asked me that. Do you know everything? I said, I really don't know. So.
Yeah, this family member came through Rhode Island to many different parts of Massachusetts, through Haverhill, spent a lot of time in Haverhill, down on Groveland Street, and then went back to Rhode Island. Had to go to Lawrence once because he left his attaché case in a trolley cart and ended up back in the trolley cart. And guess who I'm talking about?
You're talking about Lovecraft.
Lovecraft, you got it.
Oh, okay.
H.P. Lovecraft, to Crawley, to
Yep.
Betty and Bonnie Hill are all involved in the Ossipee Triangle. Which,
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, let's take the traditional triangle. It's most of Carroll County. So that's Ossipee, Tamworth, Chicora, Madison, Jackson, New Hampshire. Albany, New Hampshire, which if you blink, you go right through it. Right on 16, you just blink and you're gone.
Like Rhode Island.
Like Rhode Island, right? Albany, you're in Albany when you see the Albany Fire Station. It's an old fire station. It's a one garage door fire station, basically, and it's made of wood.
Okay.
And it's an Albany Fire.
Well, cool.
And then you're already through Albany. This area has always fascinated me, believe it or not. But in my opinion, and I think we've discussed opinions about triangles many a time, you and I.
Mm-hmm.
When I researched the Ossipee Triangle, we have stuff going all the way to Berlin, New Hampshire, a lot of similarities. So, how far do these triangles really go when it's all said and done?
Well, that's the thing. Well, we always refer to them as research tools, but that's on our bucket list. We had 6 other triangles we're working on, but we'd like to pursue the Ossipee one at some length as time goes by. What else has happened up there?
Well, obviously in that area we've had Bigfoot sightings all over the place.
Yeah.
From Ossipee all the way to White Mountain National Forest. Too numerous to even discuss because we could spend a whole show on that. I have about 15 years worth of research done, and friends of mine who work for the Park Service and the rangers up there and everybody else in the local police departments calling me on a regular basis. But we also got a lake monster up there in West Ossipee. And that's what I really wanted to discuss, lake monsters.
Yeah. No vampires, though.
No vampires that I could find, but lake monsters. And you know what I find interesting about lake monsters? They all came out around the same time, except for like our friend and your friend came out a little bit earlier than that. And supposedly there were writings of lake monsters up in the Ossipee area and beyond, that dates back to Native American times, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when did we really start hearing about lake monsters? Early 1900s, late 1800s, right? Early 1900s?
Yeah.
Well, what was going on in the late 1900s? We had the expansion of our country. The Civil War's over. We're back to peace with each other. We all love each other. Everybody's happy with each other, so now we're expanding. Now hotels are opening up all over these tourist areas. Rhode Island, I don't care where they are. Massachusetts, New Hampshire. Well, what better way to attract somebody than having a lake monster, huh?
Well, that's
Come
true.
on, take a vacation, and you might catch a lake monster. I've been through the lakes of Ossipee and yet to catch a lake monster. I've seen plenty of artwork of lake monsters. There was one out in Ossipee Lake West, which is off 16. It's more towards Tamworth in that area, so the other side of the lake. And the first writing about came in a tourist newspaper in the 1920s. You know how they used to, up until about the 1990s, you used to be able to pick up tourist papers anywhere you went.
Oh, yes.
Now they don't have them anymore. Those are obsolete, which is a crying shame. But yeah, they picked that up. I've also heard about a monster up around Madison in the same type of newspaper, in the 1940s. So it's interesting that these things pop up.
Yes,
they
indeed.
pop up in tourist areas.
Yeah.
Chicora Lake supposedly has Chalky. I've only seen one reference to Chalky and nothing else. So I've kind of put that in the back burner. Those, you get one reference while you're doing your research. You don't throw it away, but you don't really use it. You could maybe back it up with something.
Mm-hmm.
So I got that one reference there. I've driven these areas, UFO sightings, not just the Benny and Bonnie Hill area, which is very famous thanks to Mike Stevens and his hard work out there making that marker. But I was coming down many a times from Berlin, New Hampshire, where 16 and 302 meet near Storyland.
Yeah.
You should see all the stuff that flies across that area at night, at 10, 11 o'clock at night as I'm driving home.
Yeah. Interesting.
Some of it might be planes, but.
Well, we'll be working on that, and I'm gonna be on your show tonight for a little while, right?
Yes, you are. Yep, we're gonna be on tonight at Orange Cable Access TV. You can check that out on our website, Hellcat TV. Paul's gonna be on tonight talking about Bridgewater, and maybe even we'll get into a little bit about Mercy Brown and maybe a few other things.
Very good. Okay,
right.
Tom. Excellent.
Right.
Yeah, and before you go, tell us about how are the plans for the Parafest going in April?
Parafest is going great. Tickets, I'm just waiting on one confirmation from one area, then I will announce the ticket pricing. When you have a multitude event like I'm planning in different locations, I want to make sure that everybody that's a nonprofit gets some money out of this besides Hilldale.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure the ticket prices are fair because this is a big-time event going from April 10th to April 28th. With many different events going on in between that.
Yeah, and Kittery,
so getting
Maine.
the pricing in Kittery, you'll be at Kittery, Maine with us.
I love Kittery, Maine, yes.
Yeah,
and
we'll be kicking the show off. We'll kick the whole event off with you, remember?
All right, well, that sounds pretty cool. Now, as far as our charities are concerned, the Hilldale Cemetery is one of the adopted charities on this show. It's on our website. Just say a few words about that.
Hilldale Cemetery is an 1859 graveyard. And when I took it over about 11 years now, it was in disrepair. It was 21 acres of land pretty much, and you could only walk probably about maybe 3 to 4 acres if you're lucky. The rest was all overgrown. We regrouped now and reclaimed about 60% of the cemetery, but we still need more funds to do that. And it's also a very haunted cemetery, too.
Well, I've been there. It's a beautiful place, and it's
a beautiful
Haverhill,
place.
Massachusetts.
Yes, right in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and you just missed the fall foliage season if you're an artist.
Well, actually, I was there like a week ago, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you caught the fall foliage, but if there's any artists listing for next year, it's always voted the top 2 or 3 spots, usually number 1, prettiest spot in Haverhill.
Excellent. Okay, Tom, that sounds great, and we'll talk to you tonight.
All right, we'll see you tonight. Thanks, Paul, and I'll send you the number in a little bit.
Very good.
All right?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, a bit of a break from vampires there. No vampires in the Hilldale Cemetery that I'm aware of.
Yes, that we know of.
Yes. So anyway, the Mercy Brown case in Rhode Island, and I found out about that when I was a reporter for a humble, mild-mannered reporter in West Warwick, Rhode Island in 1979. And they knew the editor knew I had both been in the seminary and had been working on paranormal stuff for many years already. And he said, come up with a Halloween story. So I kind of went into local history, and the Mercy Brown case was not unknown. And the media would tend to drag it out at Halloween. I guess maybe I started that trend in Rhode Island. I don't know. As far as I know, it had been written about in the 1950s, but the story pretty much goes like this. Now, the Browns of Exeter, Rhode Island. Exeter is a very rural place for those who don't live here. And the Browns were not country bumpkins. They were among the founding families of Rhode Island. I mean, Brown University is named after their people. And so that is the background to this. And as we mentioned, the members of the family would often start to die one by one, very often by age. Now, 95% chance this was what was known then as consumption, or a form of tuberculosis. which would rip through families like it was the COVID of its day. So the Brown family, the children started to die one by one. Mercy Brown was considered to be the vampire because they literally exhumed the bodies, and if anybody was seriously decomposed, obviously no home for a vampire ghost in there. But Mercy was found, supposedly, this is well attested, including by a doctor, to be perfectly preserved and with blood in her mouth and in some of the organs, which is not usually the case when you have passed away. Now, my theory is, and I don't mean to be unnecessarily vivid here, but there were, in the old cemeteries, particularly in New England where it's really cold in the winter, receiving vaults. Now, you see them in a lot of old cemeteries that they're just very much covered up with turf, and there's a big door. And today they use it usually to store the lawnmowers and stuff. But in the days before heavy equipment, where you couldn't dig in the ground when the ground is frozen, you had to leave the bodies in the receiving vault, and the cold would preserve them. And I think that's what happened with Mercy, because she had died, but she had been in some of the cold weather in the receiving vault at the Chestnut Hill Cemetery in Exeter, and was buried, and probably nothing had happened really to the body. And so I think that's one idea. Maybe that's wrong. So everybody says, aha, and again, this was presided over by a doctor. The heart was removed and burned on a rock that can still be seen on this in this little cemetery. And here's where we get into some of the most ancient and most bizarre traditions behind the vampire beliefs. That taking into yourself the body or some of the organs, even cannibalism in some cultures, of someone else will help you to survive physically, or will help you to take on the good characteristics of the person whose essence you are somehow consuming. Because some of the ashes from this burning of this heart were mixed into a potion of medicine, and again, by a doctor, and given to the younger brother who was very ill. They thought he was going to be the next one. So strangely enough, I mean, the guy died anyway, but he'd gone to Colorado in order to get cleaner air. That was part of the plan. And again, this is 1892. I mean, historically, that's like yesterday. And because the media had been growing at the late part of the 19th century, this was in the press. And as I say, Bram Stoker heard about this. I don't think it gave him the idea for the book Dracula, but I think it gave him some ideas about what to put in the story. And again, these clippings were found in his papers. He was Irish when he died in 1912. So there's a Rhode Island connection to Dracula, one way or the other. This was not the only case, this Mercy Brown case that occurred. There were a number of other cases in Connecticut, particularly eastern Connecticut and Rhode Island, from the time of the Revolution up to about the end of the 19th century. And one of them came to light in 1991 when a bunch of boys were playing near Jewett City, Connecticut, by an old quarry, and all of a sudden a skull rolls down the hill and lands at their feet. So naturally they freak, and this came to the attention of not only the police, but the archaeology people from the University of Connecticut. And they came and they realized that the thing was very, very old. It wasn't like some recent murder victim or anything, so the cops, that satisfied them. And apparently this quarry had been expanding and had overtaken the Walton family burial ground. Now, New England is full of little family burial grounds. People used to put their relatives somewhere on their property, particularly if it was a farm. They'd put a fence around it, and that would be the family burial ground. So that was one of these. And when exhumations occurred, there was really nothing left, just skeletons. It was found that the bodies apparently had been mutilated after death, apparently because by vampire hunters. They're the same thing as Mercy Brown case. So this was not just in Exeter, and it was really strange that somehow spread in New England, and people were doing this for the better part of a century, if not more. So I've always wondered, Ben, how did these beliefs come to New England from Eastern Europe? Because they're very much along the Eastern European line.
I think I have a reason.
Oh, okay. I've been waiting for 40 years to hear the reason.
So I think it starts with Gilles de Rais. If you are not familiar with the name, he was right-hand man of Joan of Arc. And unlike St. Joan of Arc, this man was not a saint. He was truly a horrible, horrible human, and I think one of sort of, not the origin, but one of the things attributed to the whole vampire hysteria because of his sort of contribution to folklore through his really, truly horrible actions, which I probably cannot get into on the air.
Oh.
But essentially, we're going to leave it at he pursued immortality through the help of an Italian alchemist. Shortly after, what was it, the 100 Years' War? He was incredibly rich. Him and his whole family were the richest family in all of France at the time. And his actions were so bad that the Pope at the time called an inquisition specifically for him.
So we're talking about the 1400s here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this was like the 1400s.
Yeah.
It's really bad. So I won't get into it. But if you ever want to research it, it's really something kind of spooky and something that actually happened. And it really left an imprint on what people thought. And I guess the only way to deal with it was this sort of, legend of vampires and all that stuff that kind of stuck through Christian mythology and is still kind of in the very much in the mythos, if you will. Okay, well, on that cheerful note, let's take our bottom of the hour break here. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful and haunted Blackstone River Valley. And we'll be right back with our ongoing discussion about vampires and other happy things. Stick with us.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Okay. Well, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal. It's WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in Rhode Island. And we're talking, it's our Halloween show today, of course. We're talking about the very weird history and the beliefs about vampires and the traditions that go with it.
I actually found something interesting. This is a little related side note. There was actually, in 1864, there was a popular Greek Orthodox manual for confession. And it was an 82-page manual. The Greek Orthodox priests would use it, and they would use it for Holy Confession. But there were 2 pages dedicated in it specifically with the title of "On Those Who Burn Vampires."
Oh my goodness!
Yes, that's. But the Greek word, if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, someone please tell me, vrikolakos. And that would be the Greek word for vampires. And essentially, it's basically if you burn a vampire, and if you get enveloped in any of the smoke, you can't receive communion for at least 6 years. It's
They didn't teach us that in the seminary.
Well, you weren't in a Greek seminary. That's probably why.
Well, all right.
But there's actually
we had Greek students.
Or maybe they just stopped teaching it altogether. I don't know. But there's a really interesting thing because the characteristics that they point out are very different than the vampires of, wearing capes and, kind of stuff.
Right.
Essentially, they would wander around in the night. They would prophesy to people. They'd destroy people's property. They'd they do all sorts of really weird things. So they would wander around and beat up people. They just
wandering gangs.
Yeah, basically. And they do it at night, and that was their thing. And it was always, so they that's what they do, and maybe eat a little bit of flesh here and there. But those were the Greek characteristics for vampires back in the late 1800s.
Well, let's get a little deeper into some of the the beliefs. Now, not only do you have the consuming of blood, but people are, which is really horrible, and cannibalism, which is even probably worse. There are long-standing traditions about consuming others, in a sense, in one form or another. One of the better ones, as far as when it comes to characteristics, trying to take into yourself the good characteristics, would be organ transplants. Now, obviously, that's real. It's done today, and it's a very noble thing to do. I'm an organ donor. Given what I'm about to say, anybody who inherits my liver or something is going to have an interesting experience. Organ recipients, and we did a good show on this with Marcus Lotha a few years ago.
Yes, we did.
Yes, where people will receive organs from donors, who are living or no longer with us, and sometimes, not all the time, sometimes will begin to have some of the same characteristics as the person whose organs they've received. They develop a taste for, tuna fish, say, when they themselves could never stand it before, then the donor was a tuna nut. Or they develop some of the likes and dislikes of the characteristics. They know things they didn't know before that were known by the donor. And again, this isn't all the time, but it is relatively frequent. So we find that that's kind of an interesting side note to this whole thing. The consumption of blood and other things what do? We receive blood transfusions from other people. This is all part of medical life in the modern world. Stem cell research. Things are developed from that supposedly help people, and certainly apparently do. So there's a long tradition of this. When you look at some of the Christian traditions, now there was a big row during the so-called Reformation in Europe when the Protestants said, well, it's not really the body and blood of Christ that you receive at the liturgy, at Mass. Roman Catholics to this day insist that it is. So do the Orthodox, as a matter of fact. And if you look at the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John, there's a passage that's not all that well known. I think I don't hear about it very much, but Christ has just fed the 5,000 people, and they gathered what was left up in the baskets. And they had been saying, Christ had said, well, here's the food we just ate, but my flesh is real food and my blood is real drink. And I've read it in Greek, and it says pretty much the same thing. He goes on and insisting that it's real. It's not a symbol. And it says that some of the disciples, because the apostles are not the same thing as the disciples. There were 300 or 400 disciples and 12 apostles. But the apostles, some of the disciples couldn't deal with that, and they left. They said it's too crazy. So if that's an accurate rendition of what he actually said, and that's always up for grabs, so to speak, then here's again the notion of the blood being taken in by someone else as a very intimate and holy experience in the best sense of the experience. Now, I was astonished. I don't know if you've seen this, Ben, but on Netflix they had a series called Midnight Mass.
Oh, yeah, I haven't seen it, though.
Well, I don't have time to watch that. I just don't. But this seemed very interesting because, having almost become a priest myself, I started to watch it, and I said, boy, this is somebody who knows Roman Catholic liturgical practice. It was very accurate, and I really appreciate that in films. That's me. Authenticity. And but there's a rather mysterious and very dedicated and apparently good-hearted priest who shows up on this island somewhere. I don't want to ruin this for anybody who hasn't seen it, but suffice it to say it becomes a vampire story.
Ooh, cool.
I was hoping Mothman, because the thing starts swooping over the island, and again, I don't want to be a spoiler.
Hey, there could be a season 2 where it's Mothman.
But effectively, they take the whole Christian doctrine on the Eucharist and turn it into a vampire thing, which is, I found very, I think it was too dumb to really offend believers, but at the same time, I thought it was really interesting. I mean, the atmosphere they develop and the characterization is really, I think, very well done. There's even a crazy church lady.
Of course.
There's always one of those, and and of course, in the end, everybody is the actual vampire star, though, actually shows up fully vested for mass. And I mean, it's really very original, I think. But at the same time, it shows this underlying human thing for blood and for maintaining the life. And I think you have sort of a three-pronged thing here that maybe started the people's fascination with the vampire legends as well, or feeds it. One is paleoscience. I call it paleoscience. Possibly prehistoric science that knew some of the things we've talked about tonight, that there are health benefits to transplants and things of this kind. Because these things, I mean, there's evidence of root canal dental work being done about 9,000 years ago in Syria. These things are all not well known, but they're archaeological facts. Everything, Ben, we often say that, who could have built the pyramids but aliens, like they're going to fly a zillion light years to build stuff out of rocks, and our own ancestors were too dumb to do it ourselves. And that's not the case. And if you look at history as being what we say cyclical instead of linear, in other words, we've gone, as we say, from stone tools to power tools 3 or 4 times, as some of the First Nations, I think particularly the Hopi believe, and other indigenous cultures too, that we kind of go round. Something will happen, like maybe an asteroid or something, or a terrible war, or something, a natural disaster, and we have to start all over again. And we carry those traditions with us. So maybe the paleoscience of the time would have been that you can get benefits from, using the blood of other people to help someone who's ill, or this sort of thing, and that could very easily have been translated into vampirism, I suppose. The second thing would be certainly just our basic fascination with life and desire to avoid death. There's a fascination with immortality. I mean, that's the premise of most religions and this sort of thing, is surviving death. So that's the second prong. The third prong would be, I'm not going to say ancient aliens, but parasite activity, and I've written about this a bunch of times. Parasite activity in the early ancestry of the human race, maybe even the beginning. And what are parasites? We're always talking about them. Folklore calls them demons. There's this name and that name. I've run into them. Ben's run into them. And what we deal with here is life-sucking ghosts, essentially, as the Sumerians would say. But they're not ghosts in the sense of dead people. I don't think there are any dead people. They apparently are physical. I've had physical confrontations with them. And they seem bird-like. I said that in the beginning. Most of the characteristics of the Sumerian gods, same thing, parasites. So I think that's the third prong, is that it's very easy to translate a life-sucking parasite. We've run into people with chronic fatigue syndrome after dealing with these things, and they farm people and they eat the energy. That's literally what seems to be happening. So you can very easily see that translated into the vampire thing of legend and literature.
I'm gonna throw in a fourth prong here. There's a really interesting theme in a lot of mythologies, and one of the major ones is usually civilization versus the wilderness, or more accurately, order versus chaos. And you can see that in a lot of social structures, right? You have your center. Think of it like a circle, right? So you have sort of the center of the circle being some sort of form of order, right? So let's, I don't know, for lack of better words, let's just throw, a lowercase g god in there. And then expanding outwards, you have various levels of society, right? So let's look at Rome, right? In Rome, during the imperial, age, you had the emperor in the center with the various gods and stuff that all kind of were there, and then you expanded outward. You had the patricians at the top, you had the plebs at the bottom, and then as you expanded further outward, away from citizenship, you had the barbarians. Or a really interesting thing that, not just the Romans would call, but the Greeks would call dog-headed people, and, all these other weird things that would exist. And it wasn't necessarily, it was a derogatory term, but it also was almost meant quite literally. And there's even traditions, a very interesting, if for those of you of the Catholic or Orthodox persuasion, there's St. Christopher, which, if you've ever seen an icon or depiction of him, he has a dog head, the head of a dog, because he's from one of these tribes of dog-headed people. And it's interesting because he lives on the outside of civilization. So there's this theme of on the outside you have monsters. Monsters exist outside of this circle, right? Another interpretation would be, like the Norse gods, right? They had the whole, all right, so you had Midgard, and you have a whole bunch of other worlds and stuff, the 9 other realms that were all sort of layered on top of Midgard. But around it, there were a literal wall or mountains that basically separated everything that wasn't, in order outside of it, right? Which would be the giants, which you also have with Greek mythology with the Gigantomachy or the War of the Giants. Yeah. They're all out there. All the monsters exist on the outskirts, on the outside of civilization. So when something represents chaos, right, i.e., someone, drinking, blood, right, that's something that's chaotic. That's a monster. That's outside of our center. And we need order, we need structure, we need something that orders the world around us, and something that represents, the sort of opposite of that is scary inherently, right? It's why we demonize people, right? Why do we use the word demonize?
Yeah,
because
people can be vampires too,
right? Psychic
vampires.
That's another definition I've even seen in my personal research, where it's like, someone who's doing bad things is a vampire, or loosely translated. It's when we act on chaos and take on chaos, we effectively turn ourselves into monsters. And so when we step outside the order, we step outside into chaos, we exist on the outskirts of it. Then it's monsters exist on the outside. It's like if you look back at old tales of people on the frontier, they're going out, they're seeing all these crazy things on the outside of civilization. Yeah, you could just say they're dumb, they're dumb Europeans who are just scared of their own shadows. But I think that there's something that's just on the outside, something unknown, something scary, some sort of monster or something that represents chaos that exists out there. If it's not in the order, it's chaos. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Very astute. There were a couple of listener questions I wanted to get to, but just by way of something our local audience will be very interested in. The town of Cumberland, Ben's native town, is just south of here, and I was, for a couple of years, the editor of the local weekly newspaper there, the Observer, Lincoln Cumberland Observer, and the precursor to the current Valley Breeze. But it was 1983. I was in the town records vault at Cumberland Town Hall looking for something entirely different when I happened to see something that happened in 1796. A vampire case, apparently, in Cumberland. And on February 8th of that year, Stephen Staples, now there are still Staples descendants in Cumberland, I knew some of them at the time. They were amazed when they heard that I found out about this. Stephen petitioned the town council for permission to exhume the body of his daughter Abigail, who was 23 years old and had died young. Said she was rising from the grave each night to drain the lives of her 8 brothers and sisters. From Volume 4, if anybody is interested, Volume 4, page 1 of the Town Council records, quote, Mr. Stephen Staples of Cumberland appeared before this body, like the way they put that, and prayed that he might have the liberty granted unto him to dig up the body of his daughter, Abigail Staples, late of Cumberland, a single woman deceased, in order to, quote, try and experiment on Lavina Chase. Now, apparently, Lavina Chase was a married daughter of Mr. Staples, and they believed that Abigail had been messing around here as a vampire thing, and that Lavina's health was suffering. The town council readily granted this. Apparently, everybody bought this, and he did, but I've never been able to find out what the result would be. And when the Staples people I knew in Cumberland said, how did you find out about that? It's not something they usually talk about in their family tree.
Right, yeah.
So I said, well, it's in the town council records. So on that note, And this is, again, 1796. Take it or leave it. We have a question from Stephen in Florida.
Yes, so Stephen writes to us, do you find as a researcher that Halloween is a thinner and therefore more active time for paranormal activity? Or is this merely just another day on the calendar that those in alternate dimensions don't recognize as particularly worth excitement? Stephen.
Okay, well, good question. A bunch of levels to that.
Oh, he's from Central Texas now. He moved.
Oh, did he?
He moved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Welcome to Texas.
Okay, I'm behind on Stephen's schedule here. Well, there are, as I said, a number of levels to this. The term thinner might be taken from First Nations term, thin place, where the worlds apparently are close to one another and the veils between them are thin. In our terms, it might be a place of intersect, overwash, or overlap of parallel realities in the sense of quantum physics, which we specialize in as researchers of flap areas, as we call them. We had to invent a whole new vocabulary just to talk about that. So the thing with this day in the year, in this part of the world, you know, if you go around the north of the equator and south of the Arctic Circle, you have winter, okay? And this, particularly in Europe, was known as a time of death. People would not survive the winter as readily as they would survive the summer. So the first day of the Celtic New Year would be November 1st. And as a matter of fact, even the Wiccans today will celebrate this as Beltane. Did I have the right season there, Beltane?
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Coming in, and that would be just, again, descending from the Celtic tradition. We always say Happy Halloween. Well, how do you do that? Well, in the ancient sense, you do that by not dying on Halloween. So, in that sense, and of course in Mexico, everybody knows the Day of the Dead, and everybody's running around with, skeletons. And it's actually a very positive thing. They will visit the cemeteries, and I think that's really good. You have to remember your blood. So in any case, I don't think it's any thinner than any other time, but in the sense that people are more aware of it, that has a factor in paranormal events. People, if we're running around, as we have our crazy lives all the time, we're not paying attention to nature, never mind anything else, we're going to miss a lot of things. Whereas if we live lives of quiet and meditation, we might have more mystical experiences. So the answer is kind of yes and no. See if we can work in one from Peter here.
Sure. So Peter writes to us, could the phenomena of alleged alien abductions be a form of vampirism? If so, how might that work?
That's another very astute question. We often say, we've said it earlier in this show, that you end up with putting labels on things that happen in the human experience, labels that we can understand, demons, ghosts, things of this kind, whereas the actual reality may be far deeper. We are always saying that when you have experiences, it depends on the context as well. If you're outdoors and you see a light in the sky and some kind of wispy figure on the ground, probably an alien in the UFO. But if you're in your house and you see something similar in a ball of light, a ghost. It could be correct, it could be neither, it could be something we can't even conceive of. So it is possible that with the reports of experiments, physical and medical experiments that are done, last week on our simulcast with the Danbury Connecticut Library and the Western Connecticut UFO Conference, we had Kathleen Marden as our guest, and she is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, the first couple, 1961, who had an abduction experience that was publicized all over the world. First time that had really happened. There were medical experiments involved. You could argue, I don't know if there are puncture wounds very often seen in these cases. Whether blood is extracted, I'm not entirely sure, but implants sometimes are made, and these implants have been, I've never seen one, but I know people who have seen them extracted from people. So it's very possible that part of the vampire lore may have been created by whatever the ancestors or the precursors in our labels were for alien abduction. The fairies and various kinds of demons and everything that would come and take people. The changeling phenomenon with children and all this sort of thing. I think that many of these paranormal events are as plain as the nose on your face, totally obvious, but because of the labels, we don't really see them.
I think it's important to note that all of these things are subjective experiences of an objective reality. We know something's happening, right? We know that there's something that happened to someone, but the explanation is through a subjective experience. So it's very hard to say, okay, well, we know what this is, and say, boom, this is it, which is, it's mind-boggling for our very modern minds. Is, we want to have a word to say, this is what this is, and reduce reality to just words, which is, it's just not good enough, right?
Oh, we have thanks to Charlie from Oregon, who corrects us on the Celtic season. It's Samhain.
Samhain.
I believe it's pronounced Samhain, yeah.
Oh, and, Beltane's spring, I think.
Beltane is precisely May 1st.
Okay.
That's right.
All
Thank you very much, Charlie. You have saved our bacon on that one.
Yes. Should be keeping our integrity.
Yes, indeed. I hate to say things. I hate to speculate on the air.
Well, I mean, we weren't quite wrong. It was one of the.
We had
it was one
chance in four to get it right.
Solstices.
Very good. Okay, so chance. Right, exactly. Okay, well, there we have the vampire topic. The only other thing I might say, again, is that there were a number of other cases in Rhode Island we didn't have a chance to get to. One of the, not only Bram Stoker tied into, apparently, the Mercy Brown case for his story Dracula, but H.P. Lovecraft, who came up on the show in our call with Tom Spitaleri, is a distant cousin of ours. His story, The Shunned House of 1924, really the only vampire story he ever wrote, Lovecraft being a great, sort of the Edgar Allan Poe of the 20th century, and a favorite son in Rhode Island here, from Providence. Really wrote a lot of totally different kinds of horror fantasy stories. But the closest he got to a vampire story is called The Shunned House, which is an actual house on Bedford Street in Providence. And he tied into the Mercy Brown story for that. As a matter of fact, he quotes from newspaper accounts of it, and he said that Mercy should have, that the person in the house should not have hired anyone from the Nooseneck Hill country, which is where Exeter is. Nooseneck Hill, very cheerful. Now, I lived there while I was a reporter for the Times in West Warwick, and lovely, austere country, very kind of spooky, but very pleasant to live in, I thought. But anyway, that's in the fiction of Lovecraft, even the Mercy Brown case features. So let's leave that subject for now, and get on to our announcements. If you would, Ben, if you're...
Sure thing. So, on November 19th, as part of the Gallery Lecture Series at the Pine Bush UFO and Paranormal Museum in Crawford, New York, my dad, or both of us, if I have the ability to, will present an in-person program on Behind the Paranormal. Everything you know is wrong. That's at 8 p.m., and we'll have more details next week. And we'll also be at the New England Parafest in Kittery, Maine, which runs from April 10th to the 26th, and that's in 2022. Wow, that is going to be a long event. Jeez.
I should have asked him more about that when we had him on the phone today. But.
Well, it's pretty far away. At least, we can work out all the details and stuff. But that's an ambitious conference, and I'm excited to be a part of it. And not just sure yet when we'll be on the schedule, but we do plan to do a live broadcast from there as well.
Well, apparently we're going to open it as we did the Western Connecticut UFO conference with a live broadcast on the Sunday that starts the event. So we'll look forward to that. And to certainly point out that after years of tech problems, all regular recorded radio broadcasts of Behind the Paranormal from CBS, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON AM and FM have been restored in the archives at BehindTheParanormal.com. Now, there are up to and more than 1,000 hours of broadcasts there. So if you're a long-haul trucker or completely retired with nothing to do, you're in luck. Otherwise, have at it and do the best you can. We also fully restored the Return to Rendlesham series from 2010 to 2011 on CBS and all related shows, along with the Achieve Radio monthly 2-hour specials from 2009. So.
And you can check out our books. That's along with those of our guest co-hosts at our show website, behindtheparanormal.com. You can also find out more about the show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and how to book us, along with our 900-plus free shows, just as mentioned, our recorded shows as well, and now restored by my dad. All that good stuff.
Right. And check out our app. On the Behind the Paranormal website, you can download the link to that. It's not in the stores yet, the app stores, because that's very complicated and we haven't had time.
Jump through, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, but you can download it, and it works, and you can get all the latest episodes, things of that kind. And again, check out our charity page on the website, and including the Hope for the Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Mass, that we talked about in our conversation with Tom Spitaleri today. Helping Haiti's Orphans, Youth Mentoring Connection, and a couple of veterans charities. And what do we have next week, Ben?
So on the shelf, that's November 7th, we'll be doing a full open line show with our cousin, Rick Eno, special guest co-host and MUFON investigator, and he's coming to us via phone from all the way out in California.
So we leave you today with a pithy thought attributed to, of all people, St. Jerome, who didn't speak English, so this must have been written in Latin or Greek. Good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better is best. I gotta look that up. Bonus melior optimus.
Maybe it didn't come out rhyming in Latin, but in English it did.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Numquam sit requires donec bonum tuum est melius et melius tuum est optimum. It's pretty much the translation. Anyway, I'm Paul Eno.
I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind
Return to this radio frequency, 167.